Have you ever looked around at the world and wondered what is wrong? What is wrong with the world? What went wrong with the world? We see a lot of evil and a lot of suffering, and sometimes we can ask, why? Well, the answer is actually quite simple, and we're going to answer that question today. Welcome back. I am doing a podcast series called What is the Message of Christianity? And in previous episodes, I explained that the message of Christianity is simply the gospel. It's called the gospel, and all that means is that it's an announcement of good news. And on our YouTube channel at Faith Questions, you can go into the playlist section and you can see this whole series put together that you can access. And so in order to understand the good news, there has to be bad news, right? So for something to be really, really good, it has to spring from something that is not good. And so that's what this episode is about. In the next episode, we're going to get into why the gospel is good news and what that means. And today it's all about the bad news. Have you ever looked around at the world and wondered what is wrong with the world? Or is there a problem in the world today? What went wrong in the world? Obviously, we look around and we see a lot of evil. We see a lot of suffering. And if you're like me, at some point you've asked, why is the world the way that it is? Well, today I want to give a simple answer to that question. And often we talk about Christianity as not being a religion, that it's just simply the reality of a relationship that we have, who God is, who are we, and the world that He made. And Christianity is simply a story, okay? It's our worldview. And in the last episode, we talked about God as a spiritual being who is perfect, okay? He is holy, He is just, and He's good. Okay, and so the story of Christianity begins with this premise of God being perfect, holy, just, and good. And you can see that at the last video. But the story of Christianity, or the story of the Bible, opens up with God creating Adam and Eve, the first two humans on earth. And it's so important to understand that He gave them dominion over the world. Okay, and that just means He gave them authority to rule over the birds in the sky, the animals on the ground. But one thing we learn in the story is that although they had authority to rule, their authority was very limited. And we know this because God gave them commandments. Okay, He told them, you can eat from any tree that you see here in the garden, except for one tree. And that tree was called the knowledge of good and evil. And He said that if you eat of this tree, you are going to die. Okay, not physically, but spiritually, you were going to die. And that tree actually represented that they were under authority. Okay, basically every day when they saw this tree, it was a constant reminder to them, Adam and Eve, you are not God. Okay, I am God, and you are under my authority. So that's what the tree represented. Unfortunately, Adam and Eve disobeyed God. They ate from the tree God told them not to eat of, and they rebelled against Him. And the consequences happened. They died spiritually. And so what this means is that the life of God that was in their soul as spiritual beings left. Okay, that God made mankind holy just like Him and perfect just like Him. And so that holiness turned into sinfulness. I just imagine that a part of our DNA broke off, okay? That whole perfect being became corrupted. So Adam and Eve, their minds became corrupted. The Bible says their hearts became darkened, and the ground became cursed. Like the ground literally stopped producing fruit as easily as it used to. And one of the consequences is mankind now has to work even harder and strive to produce things from the earth. Childbearing became painful. Okay, God didn't intend childbearing to be painful. This was a result of the fall. And overall, mankind became depraved at the core of their soul. And this is called the doctrine of the depravity of sin, meaning we have become completely depraved from the original way that God made us. And in Genesis 3, God actually speaks to Adam, essentially pointing his finger and saying, because of you, the ground is cursed. Oftentimes we want to look at the evil in the world and we want to blame God. Why would a loving God allow this to happen? And God shows us right here in the text, no, because of you, the ground is cursed. And so Adam's nature became sinful. And when he had children, that same nature was passed on to them. It's called the imputation of sin. And so if you just pass that down through every generation all the way to today, we are all this way. Okay, all of us are depraved. All of us are corrupted because of sin. And Jesus said, out of the heart comes evil thoughts. Okay, so evil springs actually from the human heart. Okay, so when we ask what went wrong with the world, the answer is sin. What went wrong in the world? The answer is sin. And I'll show you a couple of verses that make this very simple. Romans 3:23 says, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, meaning every single person has sinned and do not meet his standards of righteousness or his standards of what is just. And then chapter 3, verse 10 also says, there is no one who is righteous. Not a single one. And I think this is a great verse because it says, like we can look around and think, man, this person is morally good. Surely that person is going to go to heaven. But the Bible says that actually on his scale of righteousness, not ours, on his scale of justice, there is not one single person in the world who has ever existed who meets his righteous standard. Okay, we have all sinned. And so there's consequences to this. And this is the bad news that we're talking about. Next episode, we get into the good news, but this is the bad news. And so there's 3 things that we need to know about sin because this sets the stage for understanding the good news of Jesus Christ, okay? So number 1, the first thing you need to know is that sin is living outside of God's design for us. Sin is living outside of God's design for us. So that word sin actually means missing the mark. That's all it is. It's simply missing the mark. So if you just imagine taking a bow and arrow and shooting at a target and you miss the target, okay? It's missing God's intention for our lives. A couple weekends ago, I went camping with my family and my children were wandering off and I told them what the boundaries were, but they kept wandering off. And so I literally took a large stick and I drew a line in the sand, a very long line, and I said, do not cross this line. Okay, and so as a father, I'm doing that because I love them and I want to protect them. Okay, so this is what sin is. It's just living outside of God's design for us. And that's why God gave us the Bible. Okay, the Bible teaches us who God is, who we are in the world that God made, how he wants us to flourish here. Right? It shows us the moral perimeters for us. And that's not him being a harsh judge. That's just him being a loving father, right? He wants his children to flourish in the way that he designed it. And so sin is just living outside of God's design for us. And that's what Adam and Eve did by disobeying him. So number 1, sin is living outside of God's design for us. But number 2, sin separates us from a thriving relationship with God. And so this is important too because you and I were actually made to know him and enjoy a relationship with God. And before the fall of mankind, Adam and Eve, they talked with God. It says they walked with him in the cool of the day. So they actually enjoyed this face-to-face relationship with him. They had a thriving relationship with God. But when they sinned and they died spiritually, it disconnected them from God. And so that's what we feel today. Okay, if you've ever been outside or just been alone and you thought to yourself, okay, God, if you are real, where are you? God, where are you in my life? Well, the Bible says that there has been a chasm that has created separation between us and God, and we cannot get back to him. Okay, sin has separated us from a thriving relationship with God, and that is the way that we were intended to function. Okay, so here's the worst news. Number 3, sinning against an eternal God demands eternal punishment. Sinning against an eternal God demands eternal punishment. I remember hearing an illustration from one of my favorite preachers, David Platt, long ago, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing because I can't remember exactly. But let's say you're a student and you're at school and you sin against your friend. Okay, if you sin against your friend, the consequences, you might get punched or you lose your friend at worst. But if you sin against a teacher, someone of higher authority, the punishment is higher, right? You're going to get detention or you might get expelled. If you sin against a police officer, you're going to go to jail. But if you sin against a king, you're going to lose your head, right? You're going to lose your life. Okay, so the higher levels of authority you go, the greater the consequence. Well, see, God is an eternal king. And so when we sin against an eternal king or an eternal God, the consequences are eternal. Okay, and like we talked about in the last episode, yes, he's a loving father, but he's also a just judge. Okay, the foundation of his throne is righteousness and justice. And so being a just judge, he punishes the guilty and he frees the innocent. And that's what we want from a good judge. He punishes the guilty and he frees the innocent. But the dilemma that we're all in, as we read in these Romans verses, is that all of us has sinned. There is no one who does good. No one has met his righteous, just standard. And because of that, we are all condemned. Romans 6:23 says, the penalty for sin is death. The penalty for sin is death, meaning, just like Adam and Eve, when we sin against God, and we all have, there is a penalty. And that penalty is eternal death. It's eternal separation from God. And really, it's into an eternal hell. And in the last video, we'll talk more about that. The Bible is open to 2 real main interpretations of hell, and that is one, that it's eternal conscious torment. The other is a complete annihilation of your soul. But the reality is that hell is separation from God, eternal separation from God. And so since all have sinned, all are condemned, unless there is a substitute. Unless there is a substitute who can take the wrath of God upon himself, who can take the sins of the world upon himself. And that is Jesus. And that is the content of the next episode. So make sure you watch that, because we don't want to end with the bad news. Would love for you to subscribe and make sure you get content as it comes out. And if you found this video helpful, please share it with someone.